Hello everybody, welcome to the OAG RC. I'm Craig. Thank you very much for stopping by the channel today. It's a bit of a treat. I've managed to source myself a copy of Tamiya's RC Car Museum Volume 1, which takes us from 76 all the way through to 92, to go alongside my 92 to 2001. Should we take a look and see what you get if you buy one of these books? So I absolutely love flicking through a Tamiya catalogue, as you well know, and this one is a bit of a treat. So we're going to go page by page and let's see what you get if you dip yourself into this one. Start off with, I don't read Japanese, unfortunately, so I can't tell you what it all says, but you do get some lovely artwork and a contents page that takes you through every single model that they've got in here. There's also some sort of areas where it tells you a little bit about Tamiya's history and some of the things that they did. It starts off with a couple of legend cars, and it's the ones that I think probably are very meaningful to Tamiya's evolution. And it starts off with the original, the Porsche Turbo 934. That was the very first RC that Tamiya did back in 1974. And it still looks like a cracking RC today, doesn't it? I mean, I can't even begin to imagine how they must store these to make sure they don't get brittle. And there's some lovely, you get lovely shots of all of the profiles of the car, and there's some information there as well about the history of the car and how it came together. They do some photos of the detail, and they always show, with these legend ones, they show you what it looks like underneath with the chassis. And you could just see how far RC cars have come from where they were in 1974 to what we use today. And just look at the bumper of that. It's just a wire frame around the front to try and protect it. Very, very basic. 1979, Tamiya's first off-road buggy, the racing buggy and the Rough Rider. I've got a piece coming on these in future videos, but this is actually was loosely based on a real Baja buggy at the time. And they even got down to the point where I think the decals are almost identical to the actual buggy that was raced. Such a great looking RC. All the suspension was very, very similar to that on a Volkswagen Beetle, which is what they used to convert into the Baja buggies back in the day. The Wild Willys M38. You can still get that today, but it's not on the same platform that it was back in 1982. It's a little bit different today. You can see a shot of the chassis there. I don't know much about this model. I mean, they almost look like grasshopper tires in the back of there. I'm sure they weren't, but that's what that reminds me of when I see it. Such a fun buggy. Iconic characteristics of Willie sat in the Jeep there. Everyone knows the Frog. I love a Frog. 1983. Look at that. ORV chassis. When that came out, that was, I've got one of these in the collection. I've got a re of one of these in the collection. And every time I drive it, I'm surprised at how good this chassis handles. It's really nimble. It's really agile. It soaks up the bumps really well. It jumps pretty well for an RC of its age. And it handles well too. It lacks the speed on the chassis of some of the more modern RCs. But I love the way this thing drives. I love the way it looks as well. Yeah, and it was brilliant. Very iconic with those two radio antennas going up. Such a cool RC. 1984, another legend. The Grasshopper came along. And that's just one that we know and love. You see even how their showroom model, the wheels have yellowed over time. You see that? I have my original 1984 Frog still, that was, up until recently, always run on the Orchard Raceway. It's a shame that I've stopped, really, but let's be frank about it. The chassis is nowhere near as competent as some of the modern racers. It just can't keep up. But it's fun to get it out every now and then, have a drive. Followed up in 1984 with the Hornet. And everyone knows that that was the same, very, very, very similar to the Grasshopper, but with CVA shocks at the back and a 540 motor and a polycarbonate body on it. Lovely. And recently we've seen the Hornet Evo, haven't we, where they've taken the rear end off the back and strapped on a whole load of extra bits and pieces. My personal legend machine is the Hot Shot. That is such an awesome shot. isn't it? That's a great picture, the hot shot. Love it. Absolutely love it. This is the one I idolised over as a boy. Interesting that the box art has gold, and the actual model they've got here has got the white wheels, which does make me wonder if this is a not the original. But I think this buggy is absolutely exceptional. In fact, that's not a that is an original, because they've got all the wires going to the back, to the, I can't remember what they're called, at the back, these sort of heat sinks at the back. So that is an original. I'll take that back. Such an awesome buggy. I mean, it's very rudimentary because it's got that monoshock at the front and the monoshock at the back. But I love the way this one jumps. Whenever I take this out and I put it out on the Orchard Raceway, the way it handles the little jumps that I have, it just jumps so beautifully. It's just completely level all the time. Perfect distribution. The only thing is, if anything goes on inside that box, it is an absolute pain in the backside to get into and do any work on. The Avanti, not a chassis that I've had the pleasure of having any experience with yet, so I can't really talk to this, but you know, you talk to anybody who's into Tamiya RCs, they'll tell you how awesome they think this chassis is. Back when it came out, it was a game changer. Absolutely changed. It was completely over-engineered, but it did change the way that people were thinking about RCs. And it is a good-looking RC. I mean, there's just no way to get away from the fact that it does look absolutely fantastic. But it was over-engineered, and they did fix an awful lot of that with the egress when that came along. Nissan Skyline GTR Nismo, they must have sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these out in Japan. And it's a great looking RC, isn't it? And Tamiya, you know, they've always been renowned for their scale models and the way that they get these bodies looking so good. That looks like it's on a TA02 or TA01. Is that the 02? I can never tell the difference with the two of them. It's probably an 01 actually, given the timeline. Whew. Now, the Tamiya don't make enough of these today. You know, it'd be lovely to see them using one of their chassis to bring back some modern F1 cars, wouldn't it? Look at that McLaren. What you'd give to have one of those in your collection. Very, very nice. Very similar, I think, to the chassis that goes in the C cars, the McLaren. It'd be nice to see Tamiya bring a couple more of these back and do some F1 cars again. Oh, and the Tamiya sidecar, look at that. We'll come to that in a little bit. So this is now the start of the page by page where we flick through. I don't think those Legends cars come back in again. So if you remember right at the start, we saw the Porsche. So this then, the Martini Porsche 935 Turbo. And these, you don't get 4 pages now, you just get 2 pages for each one. The Tyrrell P34 six-wheeler. What a cool model that is. Yeah, and Tamiya re-released this on a slightly tweaked and adjusted chassis, I believe, but it's still an awesome looking RC. Can you imagine when that turned up for an event? Like a real one-to-one car that with 6 wheels. That's fantastic. The XR31 Combat Sport Vehicle, you can still buy those today. Very, very similar. Oh, wow. Look at that one. Lamborghini Countach. Now that is an impressive looking model, isn't it? Wouldn't it be great if Tamiya got the license back for Lamborghini and put another one of those out into the marketplace? Yeah, great. Love it. Absolutely fantastic. Martini Porsche 936. Very similar chassis. See all these metal chassis. The Lamborghini Cheetah. There must have been a relationship with Lamborghini. Another Countach LP500S. Nice. Very, very cool. Toyota Celica LB Turbo Group 5. Look at that one. Again, all metal chassis. First F1 chassis, the Ferrari. It's amazing how intricate all the metalwork that went into these were. The Liga JS9 Mantra Competition Special. Very cool again. 2 more. They've got some plastics coming onto the chassis over this side, look. So this is where we're starting to see a bit more plastic creeping into the design. Probably bringing the price down and making it easy to manufacture and easy to pump out the scale. The March 782 BMW. So clearly there's a big focus here on road cars as we move into 1989. And then we had the Rough Rider, and then we rolled into the Sand Scorcher. And a different livery on that. You always see the blue, and that yellow and red is really cool, isn't it? And this is where things started to really kick off for the buggies. You know, we've got that FRP chassis underneath there with the watertight box for the electronics, so you can go and splash it through the puddles and really get it wet and have some fun with it. B2B racing sidecar. How cool is that? I mean, this is Tamiya just having fun, you see. They're just making cool models and people are just enjoying having fun with them. That'd be a fun one for Tamiya to do a re-release of, wouldn't it? Page on the batteries. Now the battery tech changed over the years for Tamiya. That's pretty cool. Some more F1 cars. Williams. Oh, JPS Lotus 79. Look at that. That is cool, isn't it? There must have been loads of on-road racing going on at the time for Tamiya. Loads of pan cars, and I suppose that's probably what people were into to start with. And they thought of an RC, they thought of, you know, racing cars like stock cars and F1 cars. And then the buggies started to come in, and the buggies started to really dominate. People started to be able to race these things off-road, and that's what really changed things. So the holiday buggy was aimed to be sort of a hybrid between running on the road and running off the road, which is why it had an open chassis with no sort of box for the electrics inside. It wasn't as watertight as you saw from the Rough Rider and the Sand Scorcher. But what an iconic design that was for a sort of a beach buggy. And people lapped it up. This was designed to be an entry-level RC, this one. It was designed to get people into the hobby. Then we move over to the Sand Rover, which was a direct copy of the holiday buggy. Just a different body shell on it. I'd love to see that one come back on the DTO2 platform. It'd be great to see Tamiya put that back out again. Don't know much about this one. The VW Golf Racing. I mean, we saw that on an M01, or that same sort of body shell, or the same paintwork of that on an M05 a couple of years ago. There it is, actually, there. That's the M05 version. Very cool, isn't it? But that's the original there in 1981. Look at that. A bit of a page turner problem there. Look at the Renault 5. Oh, look at that Renault 5 Turbo. Very sweet. And the Ford Ranger, based on that same chassis you saw a minute ago for the Sand Scorcher, with that tub inside to protect all the electronics. But this one looks like it's jacked up a bit for a truck. And they did the same thing there. Oh no, this was the Toyota. So this was the first one that came with the old gear selectors in the middle that allowed you to change the gear. That must have been pretty cool at the time to get into all that sort of stuff. Another F1, a Honda, or F2 as it is, a Honda. Then we've got the Brabham over here. Lots of F1s. We just don't see this level of detail from Tamiya when it comes to real life race cars these days. A lot of focus is on sort of real world cars. That's cool, isn't it? That Ford C100. How basic that chassis is. Hardly anything in there at all. And then we have the Super Champ 1982. No watertight chassis on this. No watertight box on this one. So very open. But that was probably for lightness. They designed this very much to be a race buggy to compete in the races. And that reservoir for the oil for the shocks at the back that drove the rear. Very cool. Audi Quattro Rally. Look at that. That was a new chassis, wasn't it? I mean, it's all wrong, isn't it, in proportion? The way it's all jacked up, and it's higher than you would imagine those rally cars to have been. But what a cool RC. Real good fun. I bet you could have loads of fun with that off-road. And that led into clearly a series of those. The Blazing Blazer, which is highly sought after by people. You know, wouldn't it be interesting to see Tamiya put that back out for collectors to get hands on again? Subaru Brat. So that 1983, this was before the Frog, so that must be on the next page, the Frog, or it would have been, sorry, maybe it wasn't before the Frog. The Frog would be around this time as well. So they were both on the same chassis, the ORV chassis, and they've discontinued the Brat again. They did re that at one point, that came through, Really cool chassis, really nice. I, again, said it before, can't believe how good that one drives when you get it out there. Tamiya motors from back in the day, 540 Technical, Dynatex, and that Acto Power that came on the Dyna Storm, I think that was on. This is getting re-released this year. There's been a lot of hype already built up around it. I'm sure we're going to see it in the early part of 2025. Willys Wheeler Honda City Turbo Racing. I would love to get one of those, but I've got a feeling they're going to be pretty expensive this time around because people are going to want them. And supply and demand always says that the price of these things go up over time. So I do think Tamiya will re-release it, but I think it's going to be pricey. So if you want one, I would get it when you see it. Lancia Rally, another one that's based on that. Oh, that's actually on the ORV. I almost missed that then. So it's great they did a rally car on the ORV chassis. That is super cool. But again, it just looks way too jacked up. Then we get into some of these Group C cars, the Porsche Fast Attack vehicle. So that's on the same chassis as the Wild one. So we'll obviously see that on the next page, I'm sure of it. That is such a cool buggy. Guys have been getting these. They've reread this recently. Guys have been getting them, doing some custom jobs with them. I think there's a huge following of this particular chassis and loads of customization that happens. So I was wrong. It's not the Wild one on the next page. It's the pickup Bruiser, which is there's a 1-to-1 of this that goes around. Tamiya did a 1-to-1 version, or someone's done a 1-to-1 version. Look at that. That's a cool livery on that one, isn't it? That's the Tom's 84C. Really cool livery, like that a lot. There's the Wild one, right after the Newman Porsche 956. So you just get a one-pager for the Wild one. The Fox, 1985. That monoshock at the front. There's a huge amount of similarities in the front end design of this compared to the Hot Shot. You could see there was an awful lot of influence that went from there and the design that they put into the Hot Shot that came into the design of the Fox. The Road Wizard F1. Don't know much about that. Maybe that's Tamiya starting to say, we need to put another F1 car out, but we don't have a license. What we're going to call it. Super Shot in 86. So that was the Hot Shot, essentially, with 4 suspensions set up rather than the monoshocks. Love the look of that car. Really do. Really, really do. The Boomerang was part of the Hot Shot family as well. Recently re-released by Tamiya. The Falcon, the one that everybody wants. You know, will Tamiya give us this year in their, what is it, their 50th year of the RC buggy? Will they put out another Falcon? Will they give us a little treat? I love it. And I've got one recently on the channel that was sent to me by Paul to get out on the Orchard Raceway next year. And I've got to just do a little bit of tinkering with it to get it all set up, ready to rock and roll. But I'm quite impressed. If you think about the timeline for this, if you flip back a couple of pages, you know, you've got the Fox back here. You've got the Wild one, 84. You've got the Attack buggy, the Grasshopper, the Hornet. This thing comes along, CVA shocks all around. Yeah, it was bidded as an entry-level buggy. But I think people found this to be quite a competent racer. The only problem is the front end was super, super fragile. And it still is today. And even with 3D printed parts, there's not really a solution. And maybe that's why Tamiya haven't reread it. The Big Wig, which is also rumoured to be getting a 2025 re-release yet again. Not one that I know a huge amount about, really. My understanding is this was kind of an evolution between the Hot Shot family and that later becomes the Dragon family. This was sort of in between. People love it. I don't like the look of it myself. It's not one that I would jump on to get in the collection, but I do see why people like it because it's quite an iconic Tamiya. Ford Ranger Blackfoot, very cool. Similar ORV chassis, but this time set up in a monster truck design. I remember seeing those as a kid, bashing around parks and stuff. And yeah, I loved it. But I always wanted a lunchbox. That was me. Interestingly, I haven't come across the lunchbox. I've been flicking through this, which I can't quite work out why it's not in here. Maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. The 959 Paris Dakar. Now, this is probably more wanted than anything else. It's the Tamiya fans' most wanted car. And if you think back to all the other rally chassis we were looking at a minute ago, and see if I can find one quickly. You know, we were looking at some of those rally chassis, and they were quite jacked up, weren't they? They were sort of very high on the road. Yeah, there you go. That's the ones on the ORV chassis. Very high on the road. This one, while still slightly higher, does look like a proper rally chassis that we see today underneath. And this was probably the forerunner for where a lot of Tamiya's road cars went to after this. Super, super cool. Lots of people would love to see this come back. I mean, obviously they've found a solution with the Rothman decals on there, so they can get rid of that cigarette branding. Yeah, I'd probably get one of these if it came back, if I'm honest. Monster Beetle, you can pick those up today. Very, very cool again on that ORV chassis. The Striker, don't know a great deal about this chassis. Not a design that I was particularly fond of, if I'm honest. Tamiya obviously tried to jump on the sort of F1 styling of the Striker. Little shot of the Tamiya Museum there. Hot Shot 2, which we saw re-released about a year or so ago. Everyone wanted one of those. For me, I preferred the original Hot Shot. Not sure what you get from a Hot Shot 2 other than the 2 shocks at the back. Oh, there's the lunchbox. I must have missed it when I scrolled through before. I thought it was earlier on the timeline, so 1987. I am surprised that wasn't one of Tamiya's legends at the start. And this, to me, just speaks Tamiya. This was the buggy I wanted as a kid growing up. I wanted the monster truck. I wanted a lunchbox to bounce around and have fun with. And now I've got one. I can absolutely agree. They are probably some of the most fun you can have, certainly with kids playing around with the Tamiyas. It's great fun. Toyota Celica on the same chassis as the Porsche. Very, very nice body shell on that one. Love it. And there's the origins of the rally blocks. Look there. The Clodbuster. The original Clodbuster. That must have been so much fun back in the day with all those 8 shocks on it. And they're massive, massive RCs, those are. Absolutely huge. Super Sabre. We're getting towards the end now of the Hot Shot type buggies. Again, released a year or two ago, re-released a year or two ago. Lots of people like the design of this one. I quite like this one, but it's not one I want to add to the collection, so I've already got a Hot Shot. And then, almost a year later, we've got, or not quite a year later, in the same year, we get the Thundershot. That evolution of the chassis, where you've got the front that's put together, the rear that's put together, it bolts onto the chassis tub in the middle. Easier access for the electronics than you had on the Hot Shot chassis. Still a monoshock at the front. I think this chassis, compared, having driven the Hot Shot and I drove the Thunder Dragon, which is probably a very similar setup to here, the Thundershot. This chassis is just so much better, night and day better. And I actually prefer working on this chassis to the Hot Shot, if I'm honest about it. Lotus Honda 99T, different type of chassis again, very nice. Look at that Williams there. That is nice. That is nice. Tamiya, if you're watching this or someone from Tamiya watches this, it'd be lovely to see you be able to go back and get a range of vintage F1 cars out with the liveries. Yes, you'd have to change some of the sponsors, I'm sure, but it'd be so nice to see some of these come back out. Sonic Fighter, again, not one I know much about, unfortunately. Looks very similar to... Actually, looks very similar to the Falcon, actually, that one does. I'm sure someone will tell me they're based on the same chassis. The Midnight Pumpkin, which is the same chassis as the Lunchbox, but in my experience, some very brittle body posts. And I ended up getting rid of mine because I just could not put up with having to repair it every 5 minutes. The Thunder Dragon left a lot of people didn't like the styling of this one. Personally, I absolutely love it. I have one of these and I love mine, think it's great. The Grasshopper got an evolution with the Grasshopper 2. And off the top of my head at the minute, I can't remember what was up, what they changed. Might have been CVAs on it when they got to re-releasing the Grasshopper on this particular platform. The Terra Scorcher. Now, hot off the press, spoiler alert, I have recently built a Terra Scorcher. And I can see why back in the day this was a fully loaded RC. You had bearings, you had sway bars, you've got CVAs all around. There's something else that I'm forgetting about in here as well. And also for me, I put on the high caps from the VQS, and this thing just looks absolutely glorious. I like the Terra Scorcher. There are plenty of people who don't. This was their least favourite of the Dragon range. I am looking forward to see how this goes around the Orchard Raceway next season. I think it will be very good. Now, the Vanquish. Now, this was a poor man's Avanti, if I remember correctly. They'd replaced a lot of the fun stuff on the Avanti with some more budget-friendly pieces. Recently re-released as the VQS. I don't have one. I would love one, but they're just too expensive for me. When they put this back out, it was about £300 here in the UK. And I think a lot of people struggled at that price point to want to pick this up. And as a result of that, you can still buy them today. The VQS has been out for yonks, and everything that's in the shop must be people just looking at it going, I'm not paying £300 for it. And Tamiya aren't prepared to give a discount to the retailers to get shot at the stock, so they just sit there. I would love one of these because I've got an egress, and I probably wouldn't get an Avanti, but I do quite like the look of this one. But it hasn't happened yet. Maybe one day. Maybe one day. But there's a lot of cool stuff in there. It's supposed to be a very competent buggy. Mud Blaster, don't know much about that, but it looks like it is on the ORV. 1989. We're rolling through the years. The Fire Dragon, another in the Dragon range. Again, I don't think that was particularly popular, but very, very cool nonetheless. A little bit about Tamiya's guidebooks, of which we've got a few. Now, the Egress. Egress took all the good stuff from the Avanti and made it better. The shocks were moved into a more favourable position, I think, would be the best way of looking at it. There's a load of extra toys on this, and I, for one, am looking forward to building this. I think this is probably one of the only things that's going to compete with my Top Force Evo around the Orchard Raceway in years to come. And such an absolute monster back in the day when it first came out. The Egress is one that I'm looking forward to knowing a lot more about in years to come. The Astute. I don't have an Astute. I have something that's very close to an Astute. My Madcap that I spent a lot of time faffing about with is probably more Astute stroke super Astute than it is a Madcap these days. But this thing is just unbelievably cool. I mean, if you think back to the two-wheel buggies we saw a minute ago, you've got the Wild One, the Falcon, and then they come out with this. This just took, I suppose, a lot of what they'd learned on the Avanti and the Egress and applied it into a two-wheel drive model. And it really did hit home. Absolutely beautiful. And they made a cheaper version of that in the Madcap, which was, again, more plastic tub. This was the VQS to the Avanti. This is the Madcap to the Astute. Very cool. And I love what I do with my Madcap, and I had a great time with it. But again, very fragile. Lots of cracks appeared around the body shell and where it met to the bulkheads, unfortunately. The Scent Dragon was on the same platform. When that reread, they reread that on the Dragon chassis. It's a real shame that Tamiya couldn't find a way of putting that back out on the Madcap platform for us. But hey, it is what it is. There's obviously a reason they've done that commercially. Lovely Ferrari F1. Absolutely glorious. Very, very nice. The Avanti 2001. I know nothing about this vehicle other than I know that lots and lots and lots of people would love to see it being released again by Tamiya. So Tamiya, get on with it. Get it out there. Give the masses what they want. The Hilux Monster Racer. Very, very cool. The Manta Ray. So this moved us into the DB01 chassis. The DB01 chassis? Have I got that right? Was it the DF01 chassis? Might be the DF01 chassis. The DB01 chassis is something completely different altogether. This was the DF01, which was based off of the TA01 stroke TA02 chassis in a buggy format. I have one of these to build. Very, very well, this was the start of the Top Force evolution. And I've seen videos of people running these, and they are super, super competent buggies. If you are looking for a good place to start in RC, these can be picked up for about 120, 130 pounds in the UK. It is the best place to start. This will be better than any other buggy kit at the price point you will find. They're really, really good value for money. So go and get one, even if you don't like the way it looks. The Mercedes C11. This was re-released. I never saw the originals, but they're massive RCs and They go like the clappers. They're really, really cool, but you have to find somewhere to drive them. And that'll be the same true of all those F1 cars, all the stock cars. You need to have a really smooth, flat surface to be able to run these on. The bullhead, which looks a bit like a clod to me. Loads of people would love to see that again. Such a great looking RC with the flag off the back, and yeah, very cool Tamiya, very cool. Tyrrell, Ford, another F1 car. A couple more on the sort of stock car, sorry, the pan car chassis, the Nissan, the Jag XJR Daytona. Look at that, that's cool, isn't it? The Bearhawk, which again is based off of the, oh come on, get it right. Is that the Falcon chassis? I think it is, or similar. Could be wrong. I'm losing track now of all the different things. No, that's based on the Madcap. Same chassis as the Madcap, that one. Lotus, Judd. Lots of F1s. You see how many F1s were in the early part of Tamiya's history and how little we get today. Just shows how things come in and out of trend. The Celica, which looks to me like it's on a TA01 chassis. So this is Tamiya moving forward now in their design. They're becoming far more modern. You think this is they've only gone forward 10 years in the life cycle, and we've already evolved into multiple different chassis types. And this one sticks around, if I remember correctly, in the second volume, it sticks around for quite some time. Super Astute. Re-released at the back end of 24, and this thing is on its way to me. It's in the post. I am really looking forward to this. So this was one I dropped out of RC around about, well, no, sorry, start again. I was really into RC around this time. This was my time. I was into RC. I used to read all the books. I never had one until around about 1989, 1990. So this to me is sort of peak RC time. And I remember drooling over this kit as a kid. And I am super excited that there is one going to be in my hands, in my possession, that I can build and put onto the channel. Albeit, I do have something that sort of resembles this already in the Madcap that I restored. But what it doesn't have is the gearbox that's in here with the slipper clutch and all the extra bits and whizzes that come, planetary gears in the gearbox and the diff. So I'm looking forward to building this, and it'll be an absolute treat when I do. And we're getting right towards the end now. 1991. Honda NSX and a Ferrari F40. Look at that. I'm sure I saw somebody, I think it was Ari, had one of these on his channel recently. Just a phenomenal body kit. Oh, and one more. How can I forget? Rounding out the decades, the top force. So this was Tamiya taking that DF01 chassis and going to town on it, making it a real race spec vehicle, which then eventually led into the Top Force Evo, which, as you know, if you've seen videos on the channel before, is the current Orchard Raceway champion. There is no better car in my fleet than the Top Force Evo, and it just shows how awesome this time frame for buggies and this time frame for RC really, really was. And Tamiya were right at the front of it, right at the forefront. Can you imagine putting all those decals on that? That would drive me insane, unless that's paint. But even getting all the lines smooth on that for paint would have been a nightmare as well. That is a stunning RC body. And then we have a couple of extra side stories that I obviously can't read to you because they're all in Japanese. But what I can say is there's lots of more modern buggies referenced in there. And I am going to get the old Google Translate up and have a read of some of this stuff. And then right at the end, because this was published a couple of years ago, it jumps off into, oh, here's all the wonderful RCs that you can still get today. And actually, when I look through this range of RCs that's on this page, I look at it and go, wow, it'd be really nice if we could still get hold of all of these RCs today. And that's sort of a little plea to Tamiya that make sure just keep putting these things back out for people, keep making them available, because we're in our prime right now of RC retro enthusiasm. And I do want to see this continue. I do want this hobby to carry on, and I want to see people getting stuck into it. I'm doing my bit and trying to get my nephews into it. My nieces and my daughter absolutely loves getting the RCs out and ripping them around the garden and playing around with them. That will lead into the next generation of people who will have a fascination into these things and how things work. And personally, I think it's a great place for kids to start learning about engineering. And there's a lot to be learned by playing around with RC cars. I was recently watching a video on YouTube of Lewis Hamilton, and he was like 7 years old racing RC buggies. You know, that's how kids got into it. These days, they sat on their PlayStations and they're playing Gran Turismo or whatever it is. They're playing their racing games, and there's no physicality of understanding the mechanics behind how things work with that. You just sat in front of a computer playing a simulation. This is about breaking something down and really understanding how it works and seeing how a differential handles various different terrains and playing around with shocks and understanding how they really alter depending on what oils you put in them and what springs you use and how they're positioned on the vehicle, and how the changing of the tie rods can move the toe in and out, and the camber, change the camber of the wheels. All that stuff is what I think young people should be doing, physically playing around with stuff. So let's keep this truck rolling. Right, I'll get off my horse now. Thank you for sticking with me. That was the Tamiya Vintage RC Museum Volume 1. If you enjoyed that, please consider clicking on the link and going and taking a look at what Volume 2 looked like, because I also have a full flip through of that one as well. Thank you very much for joining me today. See you all soon on the OAG RC. Bye for now.